$1 in 1915, $234.78 today. So hi everyone, I am just getting ready to go out and do some grocery shopping because it's Easter, and I have had so many people ask me about inflation and the rate of inflation and where things are going, and I thought, okay, well, this is a perfect opportunity to tackle it. I did tackle it in 2021 in the election that we were going to see significant inflation and inflation spike, and that is a direct result of government spending and government printing more and more money. So I wanted to address a few key issues because people are going, well, what do I do? What do I do? So we have to understand what inflation is first and foremost. And the Bank of Canada would have you believe that increase in energy prices and supply and distribution chains are the cause of inflation. And the Bank of Canada, more than anyone, knows and understands what inflation actually is. It's easy to say that inflation is an increase in the price of things. Well, that defines the symptoms, the result of inflation. Inflation is directly caused by an increase in money supply. And that is within the full control of government because governments control the supply of money. They tell the banks how much to print. And that is actually what has caused inflation. So the reason that most people don't connect A to B quickly is because inflation only occurs about roughly 18-24 months after the money has been printed. So you print the money, and then people have to realize, okay, I get a little bit more money in the bank account in the short term. And then they start spending and they realize, okay, and then you've got the same amount of money or more money now chasing the same number of goods, and prices start to increase. And you see the full effect of that usually within about that 24-month time frame, which is what we're seeing now. The government has gone on a massive spending spree. They have increased our money supply substantially, and inevitably and always, anytime you see inflation, it is always directly related to the fact that there has been an increase in money supplies. And you can go way, way back. It doesn't matter to pre-depression and the depression. If you saw an increase in gold, for example, the gold rush, that caused an increase in money supply. And inevitably, you saw an increase in prices that resulted. Now, those were small because mining gold or, panning for gold actually required labor and time and effort, unlike just adding a few zeros to the end of the bank account. So, it was tempered and you didn't see these big peaks and these big troughs. Why? Because it was tied to gold. Now that it's not tied to gold and it's just let the printing presses go and we're moving more towards a digital, you're seeing that occur, these big spikes and these big troughs. So government, though, is 100% directly responsible for inflation, without question. And if you don't believe me, you can go talk to and read up yourself. Milton Friedman is a great resource. He, quote, inflation is a direct result of monetary policy. It's a monetary phenomena. Government policy, basically government spending, the printing of money. Friedman also talked about, inflation was always produced by high public spending and growth in money supply. So it wasn't sometimes, it's always. And he even will tell you, if you go and you look throughout history, inflation is always a result of the increase in money supply. And that is totally within the government's control. And the banks are well aware of that. So the banks to turn around and trying to hide that fact to you, why would they do that? And I actually want to read a quote because it's important for you to understand not only the cause and what it is, but the effect of it on us as people, the middle class and the upper middle class and the lower class, because we're the ones that suffer. So inflation, and Milton Friedman says this, is like a disease. and a very dangerous, sometimes fatal disease is what he says for society. And if you look at Germany, you look at Russia, you look at Austria, you look at Brazil, you look at Chile, you look at Zimbabwe, the list goes on and on and on and on of runaway inflation. And it is always a result of an increase in the money supply. But who benefits and who suffers? So it's the middle class, the working class individual who suffers the most from inflation. And who benefits? Well, this actually benefits the government. And there is a quote here, I just want to dig it up, from John Maynard Keynes, so Lord Keynes. And this is, the governments follow his economic theory. I follow more Austrian economic theory, which is a little bit more sound, it's a little bit more practical. It is definitely, if you want to talk about conservative versus liberal, definitely more on the conservative side. And that's your Ludwig von Mises, your Rothbards, your Milton Friedmans, your Hayeks. Great, they understood economics, won Nobel Prizes, and very sound monetary policy really come out of what they have promoted. And Lord Keynes, however, decided that debt and credit was the way that the governments could benefit greatly from his system and theory of economics. But he himself even will agree that increase in money supply always increases prices. He calls this an economic law. Okay, but here's the quote that I want you to pay attention to. So this is his words, quote, "By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens." Okay, so they know damn well what they're doing when they print money. But governments are not accountable, and we don't hold them to account. And then he goes on to say that while it impoverishes the many, it enriches some. I want to point out that when governments print money, that's legal, but the illegal form of printing money is called counterfeiting. Okay, just let that think in for a few moments. Inflation redistributes wealth, and it redistributes wealth to the government and the people who own assets. And that's a handful of the very wealthy individuals around the world. And the people who pay for that are the people who've saved. It's your small local business owner. It is the common everyday working class, your middle class. And we pay the price significantly for that. One of the things, though, before I leave, is because how do you cure inflation? Well, here's the cure. It's very easy. It's not popular. And it does have consequences, obviously, in the short term. But you have to decide whether or not the cure is more, I guess, applicable than continuing with the problem. So the inflation, runaway inflation, it's unsustainable. We can't allow that to happen. And that means that we have to stop spending. And that means we have to stop printing money, which if you notice in the last budget, it's, again, more printing money to spend more money that we actually don't have. And that's a huge problem. We are spending resources that we don't have. And worse yet, you can find a quicker way out of the downside of stop spending by increasing productivity. And the government is not increasing productivity. As a matter of fact, they are the biggest hindrance to productivity. Our oil and gas sector, our mining sectors, our natural resources, manufacturing, regulation, all of these things hinder the economy. They get in the way. So here's two things to think about. The government is the biggest expense in the lives of Canadians. The government is the biggest expense in the lives of most citizens around the world. So A, they take your tax dollars, right? They are the biggest expense. The biggest expense that comes off of your paycheck every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whenever it is taxes. So they are the biggest expense. And then through regulation, they limit and restrict your ability for innovation, creativity, research, development, growth of your own business. they are the biggest restriction to productivity in this country. So as interest rates continue to go up, just stop and think about who's actually responsible. It is not the war in Ukraine. It is not the supply chain distribution issues, which again, if you really wanted to go there, you could link those back to the government too, because the idea and the concept of locking down the economy is a direct result of government policy. It wasn't a result of a virus. We have viruses all the time, whether it's COVID, flu, Ebola, it doesn't matter. You know, those things happen, but how we respond to those obviously have an impact on people's lives. And to lock everybody down obviously hurt the economy. And if there is some issues with supply chain, which there definitely is, and that's a whole other conversation, you know, obviously the less supply you have, the more demand, and the more demand, the increased prices. But that truly is temporary. The Bank of Canada increased interest rates after telling everybody just simply a year ago that we would not have inflation, that interest rates would remain very, very low for a very long time. And that also spurs on speculation. And so people have spent more money and have made decisions in their lives to take on more debt based around what the Bank of Canada has actually come out and said. And again, no accountability. So, oh, that was last year. Oh, change our mind. They knew last year because, you know, if you want to take a look about the war in Ukraine, for example, and with Russia, you know, we had inflation already creeping up well before. And, you know, even without COVID, we had major problems because we had spent way too much money and increased the money supply. We knew inflation was coming. They just now get to go back and say, oh, but we had to spend it because of COVID. It's a scapegoat. It is nothing more than a scapegoat. And they're not accountable. We still have money that's missing. The government is put out a new budget, but there's still $600 million that hasn't been accounted for rather, in the last budget. You know, I think McKenna, $630 million, something like that, went missing. Chrystia Freeland, $600 million of COVID spending, and nobody can tell anybody what it was actually spent on. So, I mean, I have huge issues with accountability here. It's like, what are you spending the money on? Where did it go? You know, and then the outright lies for the Bank of Canada, for the government to try and point the finger at somebody else for inflation is just absurd. They know damn well who is responsible for causing inflation, and it is to their benefit. It is a tool in their toolbox that they don't hesitate to use when they need to. And it does. It's a secret, unobserved way, a hidden tax to confiscate the wealth of the citizens. And they are well aware of it. So I am now going to go spend some money because it's Easter and there are things that need to be done. But that's my rant for today, and I hope that you will take the time to go and understand a little bit more about how inflation actually hurts our economy, and how we would be far better off to kind of live within our means. And that doesn't mean that there's not some temporary circumstances where you can certainly increase the money supply, but you need to note that increasing the money supply is going to increase prices, and the labor wages do not keep up with the rate of inflation. The last thing I will leave you with here is $1 in 1915. $1 in 1915. $234.78 today. So $100 bill in your pocket right now. In 1915, $100 bill, it would be worth $2,347.83 today. So that is a net loss of 96% of your purchasing power. Think about that. And the government is 100% responsible for that. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful Easter, and I will be back to chat more soon.